Welcome once again to our webinar this morning on our tour Austria, the Heart of Hospitality. I'm very excited about this program for reasons which I'll explain to you in just a few minutes. So let's dive right in. And first of all, for those of you who are perhaps that you haven't joined one of our webinars before, or you haven't come to one of our events, to tell you a little bit about what Wheel and Anchor is all about. And what we're about is bringing travelers together. And so when we say bringing travelers together, this is, of course, our mission statement, our message. You see it in all of the material that we send out to our members. If you think about your own experience of, when you're sharing stories at home with people about places that you've been, trips you've been on, you can tell a traveler from a non-traveler, because the person who hasn't traveled a lot or doesn't really care about much about traveling, I mean, they sort of, their eyes glaze over when you talk about all these wonderful experiences that you've had in places that you've been. But when you talk to a traveler, they're fixated on the conversation. They're engaged because they've either been there themselves, or it's someplace that they've always wanted to go, or maybe you're inspiring them to go because you're a traveler and they sort of want to follow in your footsteps. And when you bring people together who are travelers, and you experience not only the trips, but the lead up to the trips, our events perhaps, or getting together after the trips, it's a wonderful shared experience, and it makes such a big difference than if you just sign up for some anonymous tour and just sign up for the group. And that's really what we're about at Wheel and Anchor, is bringing travelers together for those shared experiences before, during, and after a trip. My personal goal for you is for you to become well-traveled and well-connected. And I think most of our members are already well-traveled, that you've already been to a lot of places around the world, and the more you travel, the more you learn about this amazing planet that we live on, and the people who live on it, and you simply become a worldly person, and you're able to understand world affairs in a much better way. And I think we have a unique opportunity that we live in a society that enables us the resources to be able to travel. And so this is what this is my personal goal for you. And being well connected, again, falls a little bit into this notion of bringing travelers together. The more you're connected to other people, the more you share these experiences and these stories, the more that it inspires you to not only to travel, but to understand more about fellow travelers, and more about the people that you meet along the way. So those are my personal goals for you. Let me introduce, as always, our team today. First of all, my name is Gordon. For those of you who don't know me, I think most of you do by now, I am founder of Wheel and Anchor. I'm joined by my colleague and co-founder, Joel Curry, who provides our technical support, as well as Cassandra McKinnon, Cassandra McKinnon, who is our member services representative, and she's the one who takes your calls and answers your questions, and makes sure that you get whatever it is you need if you are participating in a tour. So the plan today, we're going to take a little tour through Austria. And obviously you're here because you've heard about Austria. Maybe you've been to Vienna or Salzburg before. Maybe you stopped in on a river cruise or something. I'm here to be your guide and to be your fellow explorer. I know Austria really like the back of my hand, probably better than most Austrians do. And so we're going to delve in and see a little bit about what's behind the scenes in this incredible, small, but fascinating country. So let's start. We're going to leave Canada. Oh, sorry. I jumped ahead. The most important part, the most important slide of our webinar today is why Austria and why it's called the Heart of Hospitality. It's all about this book, which will be soon available from us or in an Amazon bookstore. This is a program that, this is a book that I spent the last 14 months developing on the basis of a trip I took through Austria. But it wasn't just a normal trip that I took. I wanted to understand what makes hospitality in this little country in Austria so unique and so interesting, and why it matters for travelers. Let's face it, hospitality is part of the reason that we go. We want to be looked after. We want to be guests in other people's countries. And Austria does about as good a job, I think, as anyone. And my book explores what are the reasons behind that. And so it's going to be released in the latter part of this month, in the latter part of October. And our trip will follow a little in some of the footsteps. We can't do the whole thing. We'd have to be on the road for a month. But it follows in the footsteps and goes to some of the places, and we meet some of the people who are mentioned in this book. So more on that to come. So now it's time that we can start with our program. First of all, with a map. Austria, of course, a small country. It's basically only a little bit larger than Lake Superior, one of our Great Lakes. So it really is quite small in terms of overall area, but there's almost 8 million people who live in the country. So there's a lot happening in this small area. 2/3 of the country, almost 2/3, is mountainous. So I think many of us will know that from the Sound of Music and so on. You know, you picture the mountains in the background, or perhaps you've skied there before. And the other interesting thing about Austria is that there are 3 main wine regions. And on this trip, we'll be passing through 2 of them. And we'll understand a little bit more about Austrian wine, which is really fantastic and greatly underrated. In Canada, we get a very small selection of wines from this amazing country. Let's take a look now at the map. We're going to start in Vienna, the capital, of course, easiest place to fly into from Toronto nonstop. If you're coming from the east or the west coast, you can fly via another European gateway to get into Vienna. We'll spend the first few days there. We're going to see some things that even if you've been to Vienna before, you might not have seen. And most people that have traveled to Vienna or say it's one of the places that they'd love to go back to. So even if you've been in Vienna, I'm going to show you some sides of it that you might not have seen. We're going to travel then down to GRAZ, where most travelers from North America have not been. GRAZ is the 2nd largest city in Austria. I'll tell you a bit more about that. We're going to travel around the wine region, which is in the southeastern corner of Austria, before making our way by train. All of this trip, all of the intercity travel is by train, heading up to Salzburg, which you probably will have heard of course, the birthplace of Mozart, and many other interesting things that go on there. And then we'll finalize by heading up actually into Bavaria, into Munich, where we'll spend the last couple of nights. So let's get into the itinerary itself. And we are going to start by leaving Canada on, excuse me, April the 4th of 2020. We'll fly out, and again, depending on your routing, you'll either fly nonstop if you're coming from Toronto. If you're coming from anywhere else, you'll fly via Frankfurt or Munich or Amsterdam or London. Lots of good connections to get into Vienna, and we'll arrive in the following day. And Vienna is truly a magnificent city. I mean, for me, it's a little bit like a second home. I've been there countless times. And I look forward to every single visit back because it has so much history to it, because there's such a mix of, historical buildings and, fantastic churches and cathedrals, but it has such a modern side to it as well. I mean, there's, you've got the UN complex that's there, and all of these incredible buildings from the architect Hundertwasser. So much to see and do in Vienna. When we get there, we're going to relax. We're going to probably head straight to one of my favorite cafes and have a delicious Austrian coffee. They have like 12 different kinds of coffee in any given coffee shop, and one of the pastries, which I think are the best in the world. Maybe I'm biased, but you'll have to find out for yourself. We'll wander around, checking out some of the places like the Imperial Palace. Vienna, the central part, is surrounded by a ring, and we will probably walk around part or all of that ring. We're staying very close to the inner ring, the central part of Vienna, and we might even just hop on and off the tram that goes around the ring, which I've always said is one of the best ways to get a feel for what the city's all about. The next day, then, we're going to have a local guide who is going to show us some of the other parts of Vienna that again, if you've only stopped in for a day or two, you might not have gotten out to SCHÖNBRUNN Palace, which, of course, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the former home of Emperor Franz Josef and his famous wife, Elizabeth, known locally in Austria as Sissi. We don't know much about her here. She is she's the Princess Diana, if you will, of Austria, and also had a very tragic sort of story to her life. I'm not going to tell you the whole story now. You'll have to go and find out for yourself. And later on that day, we're going to head up a little bit into the Vienna woods, check out some of the vineyards that that they're so known for, and probably get our first sampling of Austrian wine. So we're going to have a great first day, enjoying some of what Vienna has to offer. The next day, we're going to have a whole day at leisure. So part of this program, like many of the programs that we do here at Wheel and Anchor, is all about having time to explore on your own. We're going to hand you a city card that is going to enable you to get anywhere you need to go in the city. They have a fantastic transportation system, and it will take you pretty much to any of the, you might want to go over to the Prater amusement park, where the one-time largest Ferris wheel in the world was. Now it's dwarfed compared to, you know, the Eye in London, but it has such a unique charm to it because it was built nearly 100 years ago. So you could go and do that, or you could go and visit, as I mentioned, Gustav Hundertwasser, this eclectic architect who was born in Austria and has come up with some, you know, cartoon-like buildings that are really amazing. A myriad of things to do. But above all, again, of course, we're going to stop at least once. I'm sure I'll be there probably every day, and showing you some of Vienna's unique Kaffeehäuser, coffee houses. The coffee culture in Vienna goes back to the time of the Turkish invasion. So it's literally centuries ago. That's who brought the coffee to Austria. The Viennese, of course, perfected it. And these cafes that you'll find everywhere in the city, you can sit around, read the local newspaper. You'll find locals just hanging out, kind of like here, but it's somehow more civilized. It's kind of hard to explain exactly what Viennese coffee culture is all about. You have to sit in there and enjoy it for yourselves. And I tell you, it's an experience like no other. I could just go to Vienna. When I go to Vienna, I often will sit with my laptop in one of these Kaffeehäuser. I might be the only one with a laptop because everybody else is reading the newspaper. Not everybody. This is 2019. In any event, so after having spent a few days getting a sense of Vienna, we're going to hop on the train, the wonderful railjet service. They have these phenomenal long-distance trains in Austria. I can't say enough about them. And we're going to weave out of the Vienna woods and the countryside, the foothills of the Alps, over the Semmering Pass and hit Graz, the second largest city. And again, I'm guessing half of you have probably never even heard of Graz before, because it's not typically, it doesn't show up on most tourist radar screens, certainly not coming from North America. But I like Graz as much, or in some ways even more, than Vienna, because although it's the second largest city, it has a small town feel to it. Of course, it has its own imperial palace. It has an incredible main city hall square with some fantastic Renaissance architecture. And it's a university town. So the city is alive with young people, which gives it a different vibe as well. I mean, there's obviously a big university in Vienna, but relative to the overall size of the population, the university in Graz is quite large. In the middle of the city, where this photo was taken from, there is a mountain called Schlossberg, where you get an incredible view of the city and the Mur River, and it's an incredible place to go and hang out. And you can either walk up, it's a good way to get some exercise. I imagine most of us will probably take the elevator or the funicular that takes us up the top of the mountain. So a truly beautiful city, and Graz will be our departure point to visit this province of Styria. And it's not Syria, it's not a spelling mistake. A lot of people are confused when they see that. Styria, or Steiermark as it's known in German, is one of the largest provinces in Austria. It is known for wine, among other things. It's known for a lot of things, but it's certainly known for wine. And we're going to visit the vineyards of southern part of Styria. We're going to go and wander through this beautiful countryside that looks very much like you see in the picture. Of course, it'll be springtime, so everything will be green and not brown or not colored. But nevertheless, the vineyards all along the hills, beautiful landscape. We'll stop in at Segau Castle, which was I believe a 17th century castle, which has this massive wine cellar in the bottom of it. We're going to sample a Buschenschank, which is a local little pub that is in these vineyards, and they serve there what they call a Betteljause, which is a plate of like charcuterie and cheese and wine, and you know, it looks like a small snack, but believe me, most people can't even finish the wooden tray of meat and cheese that you get, and everything products from the local area. I'll now to talk to you a little bit about, just to give you some context, because again, you may or may not have even tried Austrian wines before. They have really become among the foremost wines around the world. Particularly the whites are well known. The terroir, the climate zone that we're in, lends itself well to varieties like the ones you'd heard of, like for example Sauvignon Blanc, and Riesling is very much grown in Austria. The national grade Grüne Veltliner, which makes up almost a third of total production, is its own unique flavor. It's got sort of a grassy context to it. A wonderful, wonderful wine. And I remember back in the day, for those of you who are in Toronto, there was the famous restaurant, and it just gone out of my mind. It'll come back to me in a second. And he had predominantly Austrian wines on his list. And this was one of the top restaurants in Toronto. And so he recognized the quality of the wines there. They have red wines as well, which are in the meantime also excellent. But again, there's varieties that you'll perhaps never heard of before, like Blauer Zweigelt and Saint Laurent, and I could go on. And it's that differentiation from some of the usual stuff you've heard of in Italy and France that makes Austrian wine culture so interesting. So without further ado, let's continue on our journey. And our next day out from Graz, we're going to go and visit Mr. Zotter and Mr. Gölles. These are two gentlemen who are famous in their own way for the products that they produce. We're going to stop in, though, on the way at Regensburg Castle. The countryside here is a series of mounds, if you will, hills, much like you see here, because the area was volcanic centuries and centuries, probably millennia ago. But the result is that you have these mounds, these hills where they have fortresses and castles, much like this, that you can see from miles and miles away. It's really quite spectacular. We can get up to Regensburg by a funicular, so we don't have to walk all the way up the paths there. And it is an amazing castle. And I would otherwise stop here for lunch if it weren't for the fact that we're going to go and visit these other two gentlemen who I just mentioned. Zotter is, and he's a whole chapter dedicated to him in the book that I wrote. He is the foremost chocolate maker in Austria, perhaps one of the top in all of Europe. And you wouldn't have heard of him. I don't think his chocolate is available here in Canada, but it's a fascinating story of a man who was really sort of a rags to riches kind of a story. You'll find out more about it when we go on tour, and there's a little bit of information in the brochure, and of course the book that's coming out. His counterpart, in fact, they went to school together, is another gentleman, Mr. Gölles, who's famous for producing vinegar and schnapps, so brandies. And once again, all local products of the top quality. They have a fantastic facility to taste, both Mr. Zotter, his chocolate factory, and Mr. Gölles, his vinegar factory, and you will be truly blown away. When the last time I went there with some people, they bought, I didn't know how they were going to carry it all home, so much of these products, which are so different and unique. Let me carry on before I go on too long. The next day, we're going to leave Graz, having gotten a sense of the city itself, as well as the beautiful countryside of Styria. We're going to head once again by train across the Alps up to Salzburg. And Salzburg, as I said at the outset, probably doesn't need any introduction. The caption here says Rome of the North. It's perhaps better known in this part of the world as the setting for the Sound of Music, and Julie Andrews and the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical from the 60s. Salzburg is a magical city. It's sort of no wonder, I suppose, that Mozart was born and wrote some of his most famous works here. In Salzburg, we'll have time to wander around the city on its own. We'll obviously have an orientation tour. We're going to be staying very close on close to the bank of the Salzach River, which flows through. And once again, it's a great city for wandering around to admire the cathedral, the Getreidegasse, the pedestrian street, or wandering up to the fortress from which this photograph was taken. While we're in Salzburg, once again, it's as much about the countryside around as it is about the city itself. The next full day that we're there, we're going to head down to the Salzkammergut, which is the Austrian Lake District, to the southeast of Salzburg itself. This picture you may have seen before. It's like the postcard that everyone sends from Austria, the little town of HALLSTATT, located on the lake of the same name and at the base of the Dachstein Glacier, which you can't see. It's up to the left. A picturesque little town with homes with the flowers out front. They'll probably be just putting the flowers out in April when we're there, but you'll have snow-capped peaks around, so picturesque. Not just here, but the many other lakes that make up the Austrian Lake District is where we will spend the day wandering around and investigating. Then our next full day, we'll have a full day at leisure. Most of Salzburg is you can do on foot. And, of course, I'll be there to give you a million ideas. I've been everywhere there is to go in Salzburg, including having walked up the HOHENSALZBURG fortress numerous times, or just to stroll along the Salzach River. It's a busy place like so many other famous cities in Europe, and yet there's lots of little nooks and crannies that you can take in and really get a flavor for what this city that dates back 900 years, what it is actually all about. Of course, if you're a Sound of Music fan, you can also join that tour and go to all of the places that Julie Andrews sang her now famous songs. Or you can follow me and I'll show you where the key sites are, because needless to say, I've been to most of them myself. Then as we approach our last day in Austria, you also have to experience a true Austrian spa. So on this day, we're going to hop on a train for about a 90-minute ride, again, into the heart of the Alps to the Gastein Valley, where we're going to visit a town called Bad, which means Bath, Gastein, Bad Gastein. Incidentally, I went to school in this valley, not in this particular town, but if you look sort of to the back of the picture down the valley, that's where I spent 3 years of my life, and learning all of the tricks of the trade of the hospitality and tourism industry, and I certainly also visited these wonderful thermal spas. And Bad Gastein was really famous from the 40s and 50s, right up until the 70s. People came from all over the world. I think like Frank Sinatra was here, and the most famous individuals came to take in these thermal waters. And we're going to get a sampling of that by going into what they call the Gasteiner Heilstollen, the healing galleries, which is a tunnel in the mountain where you get down to your bathing suit, you don a bathing suit and you go into the mountain, and it's like a natural sauna with all of these the steam and gases coming out. So we'll spend 30 minutes in there with a relaxing massage. We put all into the program, so you'll get a sense of why people go here for weeks and weeks at a time. We'll have a chance to explore around this lovely town with a super picturesque waterfall, and then depending on time, we may a little bit out of the valley. We may have time to go up the cable car. We're going to sort of play it by ear. There's lots of things to do, but just enjoying the beautiful scenery that is Bad Gastein. So we'll head back to Salzburg for our last night in Austria, and then the next day we'll be heading on the train once again up to Munich, which of course is the capital of Bavaria and the largest city in the southern part of Germany. Here with the backdrop of the Alps. I must confess, I haven't seen so many days where it's been so clear that you can see the Alps as clearly as you can in this photograph. But nevertheless, Munich, again, a wild city. And where Austria is all about the wine, and they drink a lot of beer in Austria too, Munich, obviously, with Oktoberfest, is all about the beer. It's part of their culture. The beer gardens are frequented by really everybody, even children. I mean, not young children, but it's all part of life in Munich, is visiting one of these beer gardens, drinking a Maß, which is the glass that you see there, a liter of beer. Of course, at Oktoberfest, people come from around the rest of Germany and all around the world to visit the incredible Theresienwiese, which is this massive meadow where they set up these huge beer tents that thousands of people can be accommodated in. So we'll get a taste of what Munich is all about. Once again, they have a beautiful pedestrian center in the middle. We'll get a bit of an orientation tour of what is where as we sort of wander around Munich. And then we'll have time on our own when we arrive to see what it's all about. The next day, which will be our last full day there, we'll have a morning tour that'll take us past the Victory Arch. It'll take us to the famous Glockenspiel, which is on the City Hall building, and the little figures come out every hour and do a little dance around. We might have a chance to visit Maximilian's palace. But the main thing is, as we have in all the cities, there'll be time at leisure for you to wander around and see what you want to see. Some of you car fans might want to go and visit the BMW Museum, which is one of the most remarkable automobile museums anywhere in the world. I mean, they've got a whole tower of BMW stacked up. It's almost ludicrous, but it really is amazing. Or the Olympic Park, or one of the other, or Nymphenburg Castle. So many sites that you can see in Munich, but you'll have a good chance to do that on the last day that we're there. So from Munich, it'll be the flight back to Canada again, either directly to Toronto, or from Munich, you can fly to a couple of cities in Canada. So we will obviously help you arrange the best flights for you. And we'll make our way back. So let me cover some of the details of our program, Austria, the Heart of Hospitality. The pricing for this program, for everything that we just talked about, comes in at $49.50 double, so per person, with 2 people sharing a room. And again, I think a very modest single supplement at $59.50. It includes, of course, as with all of our programs, all of our transfers between Vienna and Munich Airport on a private basis. Where I meet everyone who arrives into Vienna. 12 nights of accommodation, the lunches, the dinners, olive oil tastings, chocolate, wine. We'll be tasting everything imaginable. We've included in here as well the cards for the various cities that enable you to go and use the local transit system, which is very easy and very inclusive. As well as either a free admission or discounts to various attractions that you would want to see. And then finally, of course, the services of your wheel and anchor host, which is, of course, going to be me for this particular program. And I have to mention as well, the exclusions, as per normal, it's basically insurance, which we highly, highly recommend that you take, and as well as meals, beverages, and your airfare. So let's talk about airfare for a moment. As you know, we have been leaving airfare out of the program to avoid people having to come through Toronto, which I know that members in the rest of Canada really don't like to do, and there's no reason for it because there are much better connections directly to Europe. And you're looking at in April, when we last checked the airfares, at around $1,200-$1,300 from the East Coast, and frankly, not a lot more. And that's another benefit to not flying via Toronto, is that there's some good fares that you can get flying from the East or the West Coast of Canada. So we'll be happy to assist you with that. And then if you have any questions about this program, I'm about to answer some of the questions that have come in during the course of the webinar. Then you're always welcome to email me, give me a call, Cassandra as well. We're all available here to answer any questions about the program that you have. But now let's jump in to a few of the questions. So I see a couple have popped in already. If you do have a question, again, just scroll down to the bottom of the screen and click on that button marked chat, and I will be able to help you. So Jenny asked, what would you recommend for an extension if I want to stay longer in Europe? Okay, good question, Jenny. From Munich, you can get anywhere in Europe. So where would I start with my recommendations? If you want to tour other parts of Germany or Bavaria, you could stay longer in Munich, for example, and head down to Neuschwanstein, the Cinderella Castle, which is in the southern part of Germany, which is easily a day trip, or you could do multi-day trip from there. You could go up to Prague from Munich. They have a very good express bus system that connects Munich and Prague. By ICE train, which is the German express train, you can be in Berlin in 5 or 6 hours. You can be in Frankfurt. You can really be all over Europe, and of course, flight connections from Munich. So what do I recommend? I recommend all of it. and just spend as much time as you can. And if you'd like to, you know, a more specific recommendation, just give us a call. Thomas asked what the weather will be like in April. So April is springtime, and their springtime comes a little quicker than it does here in Canada. So typically in April, it's still cool in the evenings, but days are warming up to sort of the mid-teens. Flowers are usually out, not so much in the mountain areas. That's still early spring. You could get the occasional snowfall up in the mountains, like in Bad Gastein, but typically in the cities, it's flowers, it's sunny, maybe a little bit of rain here and there. I quite like April, particularly because it's sort of an in-between season, and so it's not as busy. As soon as you get into May, a lot of these places get very, very busy. Good, and okay, and Don asked, what's the currency in Europe? In Austria, the currency in Austria is, of course, the euro, as it is throughout Europe. So it's very easy. You don't have to worry about. You just have to change euros, and you're good for the whole trip. Sue asked if I can say a little bit more about the spa experience. So we're only going to get a sampling of what all is possible there in Bad Gastein, because they have thermal waters that have been coming out of the rocks since long before people got there. So the spa experience that we're going to do is a healing gallery, where we're going to go on a little train that's going to take us 2 kilometers to the middle of the mountain. And in this place, these gases, this hot air, if you will, comes up and circulates around, and it's an environment like a sauna, except that you're surrounded by rock. And it is really beneficial for a number of different ailments, or it just makes you feel good. It's just like coming out of a sauna, but it's all natural. You could, of course, go into the thermal pools. They have phenomenal thermal spa facility right across from the railway station in Bad Gastein. So you can go and do that. You can go and get a massage. There's a number of things you can do on your own if you want to really, truly delve into that experience. And this particular water, the mineral properties are such that they drink it, they inhale the steam from it, they put their feet in it, they bathe in it. Obviously, it has been known to have such incredible healing properties, and frankly, just relaxation. So I think it's a wonderful experience. Good. Then I think that wraps up all the questions that I see now. So we will leave it there. And once again, if you do have any other questions, please drop us a note. I always love to hear from our members, and be happy to give you any more information. Our contact details are there, of course, on our website, and hoping that you will join us on our Austria Heart of Hospitality tour in April. I look forward to connecting with you all very, very soon. So have a wonderful day.